Michel Barnier traveled to Washington to make a plea to the U.S. government, as he claimed Europe needed Washington more than ever before the UK voted leave in the Brexit referendum. In December, Brussels did not waste any time and announced a new plan to improve relations with the U.S. ahead of President Joe Biden's inauguration. The European Commission defined 4 major policy areas to focus on: health response, climate change, trade and tech, and security. Despite Brussels' goodwill, the two sides already appear to be at loggerheads. In January, Mr. Biden signed an executive order to tighten Buy American requirements in federal government procurement, a first step to fulfilling his campaign promise to bolster the country's manufacturing sector, but a huge blow to the economy of the 27 EU member states. And despite pressure from Brussels to repeal the Jones Act to allow greater competition in the shipping sector, administration officials announced Mr. Biden will also soon reiterate his support for the law, which requires goods shipped within the U.S. to be transported on American vessels. They say this could help invest in building offshore renewable energy and put Americans to work doing it. Economic tensions between the U.S. and EU were already quite high. The Trump administration placed billions in tariffs on European goods, and both the U.S. and EU recently concluded a rancorous trade dispute over subsidies to their major aviation companies. Brussels has been trying in vain to strengthen transatlantic relations for almost a decade, and even hoped the U.S. could help stop Britain leaving the EU. In November 2015, the EU's chief Brexit negotiator, Michel Barnier, who at the time was a special advisor to the President of the European Commission on European defense and security policy, traveled all the way to Washington to make a plea to the U.S. government. A few days before, a series of coordinated Islamist terrorist attacks had taken place in Paris, killing at least 130 people. Mr. Barnier said, "Europe needs you now more than ever. Europe is facing both external and internal threats that we can most effectively tackle together. There are those threats we very easily perceive as common ones. Serious threats that jeopardize our way of life and the freedoms currently enjoyed in Europe and North America." Stressing for cooperation, the French politician mentioned Russia tearing up the rules of international relations and the malign growth of ISIS threatening vast territories. Mr. Barnier then emphasized there were risks and threats that, even though might have been less salient in Washington, were nevertheless very real, such as the refugee crisis and Brexit. Urging the U.S. to take in more refugees and increasing humanitarian funding, Mr. Barnier said, "The refugee crisis is both a humanitarian disaster and a great challenge to Europe's unity and resilience." The second threat, Mr. Barnier noted, was the risk of political disintegration of the European project.